Hello, everyone. This is Jack Bosch speaking, your host of the Forever Cash Life Real Estate Podcast. I'm super excited to host another episode. Today, we're going to talk about how to grow from doing turnkey houses all the way to a portfolio of 3,500 rental units. Stay tuned. There's going to be lots to learn.
Welcome to the Forever Cash Life Real Estate Investing Podcast with your hosts, Jack and Michelle Bosch. Together, let's uncover the secrets to building true wealth through real estate and living a purpose-driven life.
All right, so we are back. As mentioned, we're going to talk about growing rapidly, growing quickly, growing from smaller deals to larger deals. And our guest today is Lane Kawaoka from beautiful Hawaii. How are you, Lane?
Aloha, Jack.
I hope I pronounced your last name right.
No, you got it right. You got it right.
Very good. So we love Hawaii. We go there probably 3 times a year. Already been there this year once, going there in a few weeks again, and probably spending a few weeks in summer there. So just love your place of the world. So welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, so let me quickly give everyone a quick update about Lane. So Lane has been an investor for a decade and now owns and controls over 3,500 rental units. Well, that's a big number, right? He's the co-owner, is the owner of crowdfundaloha.com, simplepassivecashflow.com, reialoha.com, and Lane is responsible for finding investment opportunities, analyzing, and marketing them, and he comes from an engineering background, so he's probably very, very structured. So we'll dive into all of this in just a moment, because he has a background in construction management, in managing over $250 million in construction projects, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's this vast background of real estate, and I can't wait to dive in there. So Lane, welcome to the show, and let's start right away to give us a little bit of an update about your history. How did you get into that? And more than anything, what made you go from being a construction manager, in that case, a project manager, to doing your own deals?
Yeah, so I graduated college back in 2007. At that time, I was just like a lot of people, go to school, study hard, get a good job. It was kind of the path that I was kind of brainwashed into going to. I bought a house to live in, again, like what they say to do. Sure. And I rented it out. And the rents were $2,200 a month, and the mortgage was $1,600 a month. So for a young 20-year-old kid, that was a lot of beer money back then. And I realized that I needed to keep doing that and get out of the rat race, because I didn't really like being an engineer. It's not the greatest job, especially when you're the new guy out in the field early in the morning.
Right. Definitely, particularly if you're doing field work in engineering, a civil engineer, that's definitely probably not the funnest stuff. They give you probably the worst jobs. So great. So then you repeated that with single families first, right?
Right. So I started to invest out of state. At the time, I bought my first couple rentals in Seattle. But as we know, one strategy that I follow is I stick to secondary and tertiary markets as opposed to primary markets like Seattle, California, New York, Boston for the rent to value ratios. So I picked up one turnkey rental out of Birmingham. It worked. And so I 1031 exchanged those 2 Seattle properties for 9 properties out of state. So a lot of people don't realize it took me a while to get up to 11 rental properties.
Yeah. Because why is that?
Well, I don't really do any no money down type of activities. For the first 5-7 years, I was just saving up my 20% down payment and buying a property. And my biggest thing was I just ate a whole bunch of ramen noodles and just saved my money and did it the hard way. But that's how I got my net worth up to from 0 to 500,000 initially.
Yeah, and that makes total sense, because if you go and that's what people like. So this single family by single family is a successful way, because if you think about it, 30 years down the road, you have 11 properties, or if you keep going you might have like 20, 30 properties that are ultimately free and clear, and you own several millions of dollars and have a 6-figure cash flow coming in. But it still is the slow way, right? Because for every new one, you have to go eat ramen noodles and save up the money. and then you can afford another one, then you can afford another one. However, you then propelled yourself forward to a $3,500 a unit portfolio. You can't do that by eating ramen noodles. So what did you do different? What was the switch in your mind that made you go from one to the other, and how did you transition from that? Or yeah, what's the background? What was the thinking process to go from adding one or two a year to adding 500 a year?
Right. So from 2009 to 2015, I was into that single family home space, like you said. Then I realized that, with 11 rentals, I had an eviction or two a year, some kind of big issue that happened every quarter with that sample size of 11. Not too bad if you have a property manager and, they kind of deal with, the day-to-day stuff. But all that was just for a measly $300 per rental, or like $3,000 a month. I wasn't going to be able to retire on that. I needed 3 times as much. And if you do the numbers, now you're talking about an eviction every other month and some big issue that happens twice a month. And that's just creating sort of another job for myself. So that's the intellectual switch that you mentioned, that like I realized that this wasn't sustainable nor scalable. So I had to go into something else. I didn't know what it was, but I guess I'm a kind of a smart guy, right? If single family homes are working, the multifamilies are just multiple, right? So that's where I kind of started to learn and get into at that point.
All right. So did you jump? What was the transition then? Did you go for like a quadruplex or a 20-unit apartment complex, or did you go for a 500-unit apartment complex right away, or what was the kind of like the transition that you did on that?
Yeah, so I got myself more into, just like how we're part of Collective Genius Mastermind, I got myself into some more mastermind groups for multifamily. So that kind of got stuck in the oven there. That got me in, and I started to learn it. But in the meantime, I still had this idea in my head that I didn't want to syndicate deals. I wanted to do it all myself. I want control. I don't trust anybody, right? So me and a buddy, we were gonna kind of go in together and get like a 20-unit or 40-unit in a good market like Dallas. And what we realized, once you start to run deals, put it through the analyzers, like a lot of those smaller multis don't work. You don't have the property manager in the unit all the time that you do with 60 units or above. And more importantly, something I'm realizing lately on some of my smaller deals is that you really need to have that handyman in the apartment all the time too. So you need to be above 80, 90 units for that to happen. Because that's the guy who's, it's nice to have somebody in the office leasing it up, but they're wearing, nice clothes throughout the day. You want that handyman in there who's going to prevent you from getting that $900 third-party plumbing repair, who just knocks that plumbing issue out, before midday snack. And that's huge.
Exactly. That's I 100% agree with you. When we went through our learning curve on the multifamilies, we owned like only 400 units, but we had the same experience. We actually made a mistake. We hired the wrong property management company on the very first property that we bought, and they ran a 90-unit multifamily like a single family unit. So every plumbing repair, even though they had a maintenance guy who was able to fix certain things, for a lot of things they brought in outside companies, and it cost us a fortune. And then once we got rid of them and replaced them with a proper multifamily management company, all of a sudden our costs just plummeted. So yes, you pay that guy whatever it is plus $3,000 a month or so in or whatever it is with benefits or so plus minus. But if they do their job right, if you have a good one, they'll save you $6,000 a month. By just avoiding those $900 charges, or if they're HV certified, they avoid you a air conditioner replacement, because if you bring an outside company, if an air conditioner doesn't work, what is the 100% of the time? What is their recommendation?
I mean, you get a guy who has that certification. I think it's like an ACE certification or something like that. But I don't know. I don't care. It's the property manager's staff, right? I mean, they should be getting guys like this. And that's the nice thing about working with those commercial property managers. It's just a whole different ball game. Right. Their sophistication with keeping to a P&L budget, with hiring their own staff, and then also the due diligence process that we can get into later. But it just makes things whole bunch easier than working with even some of the more sophisticated residential property managers.
Right. No, 100% agree. So again, then to that point, there's so once we hired them, all of a sudden, instead of having to replace every AC that was not working, they were all repaired, and it saved us fortunes over the course of the year or multiple years. So people always are like, well, but you have these people hired now full time. Isn't that expensive? Yeah, but they're saving a lot of money. So I'm 100% with you. So now you went through that process. Now, typically, the first time around, when you buy 100 units or so, how did you qualify for those deals? Because typically the requirements is that your net worth needs to be equal or higher to the purchase price of the property.
Right. So we transitioned to going after more non-recourse debt, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, because I realized why are they giving people who I thought syndicators were rich back then. I was like, why are they giving out these sophisticated businessmen and syndicators these really great government subsidized loans? And that was eventually what tipped the scales for me to just syndicating with other people, getting out of my comfort zone and going down that route. But
so did you have to bring a partner that has that net worth in for the first few deals?
Right. So my net worth was not at a point where I could qualify for 50, 100 unit property. Those, if you're buying them at $50,000 a unit, you're going to need another guy who's at least a couple $1 million net worth, because the balance sheet of the key principals need to be greater than or equal to the loan. Right. Is one thing. The second thing is there's some liquidity requirements. People need to have a certain amount of liquidity in their bank account, which usually isn't that hard. Sometimes they can put you in a little pickle, but the third big one is somebody on the key principal team needs to have the experience of a past Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac deal. And we call that the Fannie card or the Freddie card. It's not really a card. It's just you've done it in the past, which is difficult because you've never done one. And if you have one, you have one. So it's sort of a chicken and the egg thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I know we ran into that too. And luckily, on the first deal, we partnered with somebody that we brought in the net worth, but he had the Fannie Mae experience from prior deals that he brought in other net worth partners. But then at the second deal, we were able to get it because we were part of the partnership, part of the key principals in that first deal. And then afterwards, it wasn't a problem anymore. So yeah, so this is interesting thing. So everyone to listening, so make sure you understand that. But if you want to buy the larger apartment complexes, you can definitely do it, even though you don't have the net worth for it and you don't have the experience for it. I mean, you should have some experience in real estate because it's a completely different ballgame. We'll talk into that in a moment right now. But you can partner with somebody that has the net worth, that has the liquidity, and potentially has the experience in the multifamily. And sometimes all these three pieces come in one person. So you might not have to bring in somebody with just net worth and somebody with the experience, but you can potentially bring in somebody who has all three pieces and partner with that person. And yes, in the first deal, you probably have to give up a larger piece of that pie, but then due to association in that deal, the next time around, you now have can present your experience such that you have a Freddie Mac or Fannie Mae experience and you have been approved for such a loan, and they'll give you the next one then perhaps without the experienced partner and perhaps only with a net worth partner. And soon enough, because every deal adds to your net worth, soon enough you have the net worth that you no longer need the partners, right? Is that approximately your path that you went through?
Yeah, exactly. And kind of going back to the smaller deals that are under 40, 60 units, to get one of these deals done, that's non-recourse debt, they're looking to lend on properties that are at least a $1 million loan size or above.
Right. So, it's funny, as they say, it's harder, it's easier to get a multi-million-dollar loan sometimes than it is to get a few $100,000 loan or $10,000 loan.
Right. And part of that is the mom and pa's have this mindset of going duplex, triplex, quad, 8plex, 16 unit, 24 unit, 32 unit. And they're the most unsophisticated. It's usually an older couple that can't really use, the internet too well and can't really use modern day project management systems. and it's a huge risk. So that's why the banks have such a premium on the rates. That's why the rates are so high, and that's why we were like, this doesn't make any sense. But it does, right? Because it's the riskiest profiles when you're under like the 40, 50, 60 unit range.
Right. So let's talk about the experience of buying your first large apartment complex and the underwriting process for that compared to an underwriting process of your rental house.
Yeah, I mean, from the underwriting side, it's a totally different spreadsheet. I mean, people in my I help people get single family homes in my coaching group, and sometimes I have to kind of pause and like remember that it's new to them. And then I'm like, yeah, dude, just take the rents, multiply it by like zero point 0.6 or 0.7, and that's how much you should probably be taking home, right? And I say that because multifamily, when you do a multifamily deal, especially when you have like a phase component of you're going to do value add in the first 2-3 years of maybe $5,000 to $10,000 of rehab per unit, and you're holding it for different time frames. It really is so much more complicated than just single family home spreadsheet analyzer.
Yeah, it definitely is from every aspect, from the assumptions, from the analysis. So I always tell people, like, if you're ready for the complexity, jump right in, right? That's absolutely cool. If you're not, if this is like, if somebody would have given me a multifamily deal 18 years ago, I would have screaming run the other way because I didn't have the experience for it. So you did a progression on this. So let's talk about the progression one again. So you started out in engineering, you got your first rental, you realized this is nice beer money. You then advanced over the several years, gotten more of them. And then you realized, well, if I continue that path, it's going to take me 30 years to get into any kind of scale that I need to get, right?
Right. And from an underwriting perspective, at that point, the things I understood intuitively were like, where the rent to value should be, what I would typically cash flow for. And I had a good feeling of, how much money went out for taxes, insurance, expenses, maintenance. And
you understand the cost of repairing something. You understand. So you've gotten yourself into real estate without carrying a multi-million-dollar loan and risk and things like that. But you built your experience in the playground, right?
Right. Because some of these investors, they'll come in and do multifamilies, and it's like, dude, you didn't even own a single family home. What are you buying this property that's $140,000 a unit and it rents for $1,100? Like, you should know that doesn't cash flow. That's no bueno, man. Like, what are you doing? Right. And if somebody had a single family home for 6 months, they would understand something as basic as that. But yet people listen to podcasts, they think they can buy multifamily, but they don't know the basics.
Right. And they run into some analyzer where they put in the parameters wrong. And then it looks like it makes money, but then reality hits and the parameters that their dream parameters are not living up to reality, and all of a sudden they're bleeding a bunch of money or losing a bunch of money.
Right.
And I can totally.
A great example of that is like what makes these multifamily deals live or die is essentially how much can you bump the rents, right? If your average rents today are $550, and then Bozo's over there, he looks for like he sees he can bump the rents to $700, $800 overnight. That ain't gonna happen, right? And that's what an experienced single family home investor will know. Like, no, you just can't bump the rents up $150. That ain't gonna happen, and that'll blow up your whole spreadsheet right then and there.
Yeah. So I agree. It's a slower game. It takes several years to get the rents. If potentially you can get them to 700 or 750, well, it'll be 2-3 years before you have them there. Right. So, and depending on what you do, of course, right. If you completely emptied out and remodel everything, you can get them there quicker, but then it still takes a year. And if you just adjust them little by little, you can't take somebody who has $500 in rent and renew them at 700. They're going to leave, right? You're going to have mass exodus. So it takes a while. It takes some process, and most people are not capitalized for that. And that's why the bank want those. That's why the bank want those liquidity requirements, because those things happen.
Right. I mean, the bank's kind of looking at it from like a debt service coverage ratio and a business plan. A little bit different, though, I think, the way that when we kind of analyze a deal and we're kind of looking at it. But at the end of the day, it's another checkpoint.
Right. Yeah, no, very cool. So I'm super excited. So you went from, so how fast did you ramp up then at that point?
Yeah, so going back to, before talking about underwriting, the first, probably, at least I think the first deal, I went in as a passive investor.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just got in and I got the monthly updates. I wanted to learn what it felt like to be a passive investor, to just be in the boat, back in coach in the airplane, and what kind of communications were coming back at me. Because originally I thought I was just going to be a passive investor, because I was like, I knew how to analyze all these deals, I knew all the people, and I wasn't too keen on like being the guy, right? At the time I lived in Seattle, and now I live in Hawaii. To do these deals, especially to acquire them, you need to be boots on the ground. I mean, none of
Yeah.
this absentee landlord stuff. So initially I went in and being an LP, and I thought that was going to be my path to retirement. And it probably was going to be. It probably would have taken 5 or 10 years. But then, because I had the deal flow and I had all these investors that wanted to kind of follow me into deals, that was my kind of my ticket into the general partnership, into getting more involved. And in a way, it was kind of like an internship, a working internship, to get involved into more deals. And after working with so many different partners, I started to realize that this stuff really wasn't that difficult. You just needed to get some live practice at this stuff.
Yeah, you got to set knife practice. You got to have some cash reserves for some stuff that happens. You got to make sure you do things. So that's beautiful. Yeah. So and then once you understood that, what happens next?
Then it's just rinse, wash, repeat, right? And you kind of just you focus on the underwriting, on the numbers on the front side, so that you don't really run into too many bumps in the operation side. And when you do go into the bumps on the operational side, it's usually a quick phone call on like, how do you fix the issue? Like if you have an insurance issue, like a tree falls on your roof or your building burns down, it's usually just a quick call to one of those insurance adjusters that is a professional and works your claim on your behalf. And yeah, you pay them a percentage of the claim, but they're kind of, it's a big enough property that can support a professional, doing these individual things. Or if your occupancy dips down to 60%, you call these leasing specialists that get you right back up there. And essentially your role as the operator is to play project manager, and from a monthly basis, just to work with the property manager and decide, what are we rehabbing, what are we doing a make ready, and then what's coming up, what's the next capital improvement.
Yeah. So in essence, you're managing the manager.
Right.
Right. Which is one of the pieces I like about this model, because on the single family model, you are also managing the manager, but you have to decide every little thing that is over, like say $300 or $500, depending where you set the limit. Versus on the multifamily, you set a budget, and then within that budget, you don't need to be asked about things that they need to spend on.
Right. And we do, our strategy is a little bit different than most folks. We kind of focus more on stabilized properties, so 90% occupied or more, partially so we can get the non-recourse debt on the front end. But we don't do huge value add. We're doing maybe $3,000 to $6,000 of rehab per unit. So new floors, new appliances, new paint. But we don't really touch the cupboards. We're not doing huge value add. So, we, a lot of time, our property manager, we work through, and who does our rehabs for us, and we don't bring in a third party contractor. And a lot of our properties they're stabilized already. So, you hear a lot of guys doing, huge value adds, maybe $10,000, $20,000 of rehab per unit, drastically changing over the property. They're needing to use contractors, and they get their hands a little bit more dirty with more of a wartime general for a property manager. For us, it's more stabilized.
We're very similar to you. Yeah, we're doing the same thing you do. Very cool. So now, what drove that thinking of doing that niche versus other niches?
Well, I think at this point it's been like a bull market for like forever, right? Like we don't know what's going to happen, and we're at the top of the market. Things are still going pretty well, I think, even with all the coronavirus and stuff like that.
Don't get me started on that one. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not too concerned about it, but apparently the rest of the world is, and the stocks and equity markets control sort of where the markets goes. It doesn't mean that real estate is going to tumble like it did last time. That was an unusual case.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, why do we do this strategy? I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm kind of faint-hearted. I don't know. I don't need to take risks these days. I'm just more for preserving my capital and going after a bunch of singles instead of hitting a home run.
Okay, very cool. So let's talk about what would we expect from the market. So what do you think the market is going to do in the next few years?
I think it's
has
gonna.
a crystal ball.
If I were to pull my crystal ball, and I would probably say Trump probably gets reelected because the economy has been doing well, and should that happen, I'd probably get pretty excited picking up more deals. I mean, that probably means we're probably going to have another 2 or 4 year runway of things going up and up and up. I don't really pay much attention to who's getting elected or what's happening in the news, because again, like I look at, is my $600 for rent apartment getting rented up, and is it slowly going up to $625? And that's where I look at things on a granular level. And as far as I'm concerned, especially when you're in the mid-market of $600 to $900 rent, those guys, the rents always seem to be going up. And even in times of trouble, and that's why I like real estate, I can see this stuff coming 6 months to a year in advance and be able to slow down my rehabs, increase my cash reserves if I see something bad happening, kind of batten down the hatches for the tornado to come through. So that's partially why I have the investment strategy that I do.
Right. Very similar to ours. Again, I would agree with you. I mean, even if there's like a downturn in the economy, people still need $600 to $900 rent units, and the people who can't afford the $1,100 units are going to go to your units or our units, because they are, from my understanding, they're well managed, and definitely ours, I'm sure yours are too. They're well managed, pretty clean, affordable units, and so therefore we are a little bit buffered, of course not immune, but a little bit buffered to some of those things. And I see the worst case as perhaps rents being stagnant for a little bit, and then once this all goes away, then rents keep going up for a little bit. Which, if you're positioned right, that shouldn't be a problem for you. It's a problem for the guy that pays $150,000 a unit for a unit that rents only at $1,100 and expects rents to go to $1,700. Right? For that guy, that's going to be a problem, because those guys buy basically speculatively, versus if you buy with knowing what your market can bear and what your market is doing, then it shouldn't be much of an issue. So would you agree with that?
Right. Like the A class goes to the B class, then the B class goes to the C. Right. It's a theory, right? But I like my chances. Right.
Right. Absolutely.
I'm even trying to get
within the B and C. If you have the prettiest B and C and the best one and the nicest one, within that, you're still going to get the best tenants there.
Right. And something I'm starting to get into now is mobile home parks a little bit.
Tell us about that. That's interesting. We have a few minutes left, but
yeah, I mean, like, nice thing about mobile home parks is that the tenant, they own the mobile home park. So there really isn't much for them to screw up other than the concrete slab under them. In theory, it's kind of like D-class housing, but to your point, you're trying to make it a nice community. And when you walk through some of these communities, it's, I would say, a nicer community than most of my Class C apartments. Nicer place to live. But this is all getting ready for the big bump in the economy, where people are going to cascade down from the A's to the B's to the C's. And at the end of the day, the social component is you're just trying to provide good housing for people who make 30 grand a year or 50 grand a year or 60 grand a year. It's most of America is under that threshold.
Isn't that the average American family income, I think, is at $56,000 right now, plus minus. That's a family income. So it means most people make like $25,000 to $35,000, and you have two income earners. That brings you into that range. So yeah.
Right. And a lot of that gets pulled, the averages get pulled up by all the one percenters in San Francisco, Seattle, the tech guys. But I mean, a huge portion of America is, a single parent works at Walmart part-time because they can't work a full schedule.
Right. Right. Absolutely. So this is beautiful. So you provide housing for those guys, and you provide clean, affordable, safe housing for them, which is a beautiful market to be in. So let's wrap this up with a couple of questions. Like, number one, what's a book that you've read recently that made an impact on you?
I get a chance to read a lot of books today because I don't have a day job. But I would say for the people listening, I'm not a big fan of books. Get out there and analyze properties.
Okay.
Make it happen. Go and do it.
Get analyze properties. How do you get to analyze properties?
Work with brokers, get deal flow. LoopNet's a great place to find junk properties that at least you can analyze, right? And then you can learn how to analyze deals, and then now you can go and give the brokers feedback as opposed to just saying no, or not answering their emails or giving them a lowball price that you can't back into based on what your spreadsheet says.
Makes very good sense. So in other words, everything worth doing is worth doing after you do some practice. So go out there, practice, look at these things, look at 50 to 100 of them over the next few months, and just like get yourself a spreadsheet, get yourself an analyzer. There's many of them on the market that you can get. Some of them are free, and start learning the terminology, start learning the details of it. Invest in some deals passively, and that gets me to another point. Obviously you have a podcast too, right? Which is obviously right there on the screen, the simplepassivecashflow.com podcast, right? And you have tell us how people can get a hold of you. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, my email address is lane@simplepassivecashflow.com, and check out my podcast, iTunes, Google Play, all those. And people they can join my little Facebook community. We are passive investors. We are not into wholesaling, flipping, and a lot of us make a pretty good salary from our day jobs. A lot of doctors, dentists, engineers, lawyers, and we're trying to optimize on what we do with our money because, unfortunately, for most of us, it's going to our day job is our highest and best use.
Right. Absolutely. All right. Well, wonderful. So thanks for being on the show. It was a great discussion about economy, about scaling, why to scale, why does it make sense to go from these individual deals that take forever to larger scale, some of the challenges that come with it. Love the honesty, love the willingness to talk about some of the challenges too. So with that said, thank you very much, Lane. It was wonderful having you on the call and on the show here. And with that said, that concludes our episode of the Forever Cash Life Real Estate Podcast. Stay tuned. All the show notes and the links, we're going to put them all into the show notes. And with that said, thank you very much. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Enjoyed this episode? Then make sure you like, subscribe, and post your comments and questions below the video. We're looking forward to hearing from you.